Hello. Welcome back to STM Narratives. Before we begin, please comment where you are watching from and the time. Let's spread kindness all over the world. In the small, sleepy town of Millwood, the park was a tranquil retreat, a sanctuary where oak trees stood tall like silent guardians and children's laughter echoed through the air like music. It was a place of peace, where time seemed to slow down. Families gathered for picnics, couples strolled hand in hand, and children played in the playground, their joyful squeals filling the open air. The park's grassy field stretched out, bordered by thick woods on one side and a quiet pond on the other. For most people, Millwood Park was a place to forget the worries of the world. But for one woman, the park was no longer a place of joy or rest. It had become her refuge, her vigil, her last desperate hope. Lorraine Jacobs had been a fixture in Millwood for as long as anyone could remember. She was the kind of woman everyone admired but didn't truly know. Lorraine was a single mother, a nurse at the local clinic, and was known for her warmth. She had dark, smooth skin, with soft, tired eyes that held the weight of someone who had seen both too much joy and too much sorrow. She had thick, natural curls that she often tied back with a bandana, and she carried herself with a quiet grace. But Lorraine hadn't smiled in a long time. Not since that day in June, 2 years ago, when her world was shattered in the blink of an eye. Her daughter, Kayla, was everything to her. At 8 years old, Kayla was the kind of child whose light filled every room she entered. She had big, curious eyes that took in the world with an unguarded wonder. She loved to draw, spending hours sketching butterflies, her favorite creatures. Lorraine would often find her hunched over her small wooden desk, crayons scattered everywhere, her tongue poking out in concentration as she worked on her latest masterpiece. Kayla was the center of Lorraine's universe, her reason for everything. That warm Saturday, like so many others before it, they had gone to Millwood Park together. Kayla had begged her mother to let her play on the swings while Lorraine sat on the bench nearby, enjoying the feel of the summer sun. Lorraine had turned her head for just a moment, engaged in idle conversation with another mother from the neighborhood, thinking that her daughter was safe in this familiar, peaceful place. But when she looked back, Kayla was gone. In the moments that followed, Lorraine's world spun out of control. Her heart raced as she screamed Kayla's name, searching the park, asking every passerby if they had seen her daughter. A cold dread filled her stomach as she realized that something had gone terribly wrong. The police were called, and within hours, the park was swarming with officers, combing every inch of the area for any sign of Kayla. But there were no clues, no witnesses. Kayla had simply vanished. In the days and weeks that followed, Lorraine lived in a nightmare. She barely slept, her mind consumed with fear and guilt. Had she been more vigilant, more protective, Kayla might still be with her. The police investigation yielded nothing, and after months of searching, the case began to grow cold. But Lorraine refused to give up. She couldn't. Her heart would not allow her to let go of the hope that her daughter was still out there, somewhere. So, every night, Lorraine returned to the park. She sat on the same bench where she had last seen Kayla, her hands clasped tightly together, staring out at the swings, hoping that her little girl would come running back to her. When the park closed at dusk, she refused to leave. She stayed, even as the darkness crept in, lying on the damp grass, looking up at the stars, and whispering Kayla's name into the night. For a while, the people of Millwood were supportive. They brought her food, offered kind words, and tried to comfort her as best they could. But as the months passed, sympathy turned into quiet discomfort. People began to avoid her, their unease growing as they watched her nightly vigil continue. "She can't live like this forever," they'd say in hushed tones. "She needs to move on." But Lorraine couldn't move on. Every day felt like an echo of the last, her life frozen in time. Her once close friends slowly distanced themselves. Her job at the clinic slipped away. She couldn't focus. How could she, when every waking moment was spent thinking about Kayla? The local police had grown accustomed to seeing Lorraine there. Officer Daniel Quinn, a gentle man in his mid-40s with a thick mustache and tired blue eyes, had been the first to find her, sleeping on the park bench about 6 months after Kayla's disappearance. He remembered that night clearly. How small and fragile Lorraine had looked, her body curled up in a tight ball, as though she was trying to protect herself from the world. "Ma'am, you can't stay here," he'd said softly. "The park is closed." Lorraine had looked up at him with those haunted eyes, and her voice, when she spoke, was so quiet he had to lean down to hear her. "I'm waiting," she'd whispered. "I'm waiting for them to bring her back." Officer Quinn had tried to reason with her. "Ma'am, I know this is hard, but you can't stay out here. It's not safe." But Lorraine had only shaken her head. "This is where she was taken. This is where I have to be." Quinn had escorted her out of the park that night and the nights that followed. Each time, she returned, and each time, he felt the weight of his own helplessness. One autumn night, however, something changed. It was late October, and the air was beginning to chill. Lorraine sat in her usual spot on the grass, her thin jacket offering little warmth against the cold. Officer Quinn was making his rounds, as he always did, when he noticed a small group of people gathered near Lorraine. It wasn't unusual for the park to have visitors, even late in the season, but something about this group caught his attention. They weren't there for a casual evening stroll. They were watching Lorraine, talking among themselves in low voices. Curious and slightly concerned, Quinn approached. The group, 3 women and 2 men, looked up as he neared. They were an unusual mix. An older white woman with silver hair, a younger black couple in their 30s, a tall Asian man, and a younger woman who appeared to be Latina. They stood together, a small but diverse group, united in some silent purpose. "Evening, folks," Quinn said, his voice cautious but calm. "Everything all right here?" The silver-haired woman, who seemed to be the leader of the group, stepped forward. "Officer, we've heard about this woman," she said, her voice filled with a mixture of sadness and determination. "We know what happened to her daughter." Quinn nodded. "It's a tragic situation, ma'am, but we've tried to help her as best we can. She's been alone for too long," the woman interrupted gently. "And that's why we're here." Quinn furrowed his brow, unsure of what she meant. "You're here for her?" The woman smiled, a sad but kind smile. "Yes, we're here to support her. No one should go through something like this alone." One of the younger women in the group, the Latina woman, stepped forward and knelt beside Lorraine, who had been lying on the grass, lost in her own world. She placed a gentle hand on Lorraine's arm, and for a moment, Lorraine didn't move. But slowly, she turned her head to look at the woman beside her. "Ma'am," the young woman said softly, "we're so sorry for what happened to your daughter. We want to help you." Lorraine blinked, confusion flickering across her face. "Help?" she asked, her voice raw from disuse. "How can you help?" "We can't bring her back," the woman admitted, her eyes welling with tears. "But we can stay with you. We can make sure you don't have to wait alone anymore." Lorraine stared at the group in disbelief. For 2 years, she had felt abandoned, left to carry her burden alone. But now, these strangers, people who didn't know her, who had no reason to care, were offering her the one thing she had needed most: human connection.